Welcome to the Special Historic Preservation Commission meeting on Wednesday evening, May 29th at 5 p.m. May we have roll call, please?
Thanks. Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Tufenkian is absent. Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
And Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Thank you for presence.
Right, item number 2 on the agenda is a report regarding posting of the agenda. It was posted on or before Wednesday, May 22nd on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Item number 3, approval of the meeting minutes from April 22nd, 2013. Are there any comments or revisions to the meeting minutes?
I have one.
Okay.
On B 1050 Hillcroft Road, we never said what the house was going to be, the name of the house,
Okay.
and it's not listed here. I mean, we voted on it. But
Yeah, it's in the record,
In the detail.
and it's Thompson House?
Was it Thompson House?
Thompson House, yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it'll when it goes to council, it'll
Okay.
have the name in there. Usually we haven't been using the names for the minutes like that, but we can.
Okay, is that the only comment?
Yep.
Okay, with that, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
Great, roll call,
Okay.
please.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
And Madam Chair Shire?
Yes.
Thank you. To approve the minutes, 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Okay, oral communications. This is a time where discussion is limited to items not part of the agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes, and the commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. Today we have one speaker, Sean Bursell.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and members of the Commission. My name is Sean Bursell, and I am on the Board of Directors of the Glendale Historical Society. And I have 2 announcements today about upcoming events. The first is an event on June the 9th, a week from this coming Sunday, at Forest Lawn. We are going to do a tour of Forest Lawn like we did last year. It's going to be a different tour this year, though. And this tour is called The History and Mystique of Forest Lawn. And it's going to be held from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. At Forest Lawn, and we're going to look at the history and the architecture of Forest Lawn and go into some places that you don't usually get to go into. And it's a guided tour, and it's a bus tour, so people have to be with us for the entire time. And also Forest Lawn is hosting a continental breakfast in conjunction with that. So it was a wonderful tour last year, and it sold out, and we've already sold half the tickets for this year. So people who are interested in purchasing tickets, and they're $25 a piece, can go to our website, glendalehistorical.org. And that's, again, the history and mystique of Forest Lawn on June the 9th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. The second announcement is that the Glendale Historical Society will hold its annual home tour on Sunday, September 29th. And I'm very excited to announce that the tour will focus on classic early homes of the Casa Verdugo neighborhood. For those who are not familiar, and many people are not familiar with the neighborhood, it's generally bounded on the south by Stocker, North Brand on the west, East Mountain on the north, and North Jackson on the east. And this neighborhood, as I say, people don't know a lot about it, but it really played an integral role in the early development of what is now Glendale. And as Mr. Morgan will know, in April 1904, the Pacific Electric Railway opened its line from Los Angeles to Glendale, and later that year it extended the line 1/2 mile north to Brand, what is now Mountain, essentially where Brand ends today. That spurred home building in this neighborhood, and Casa Verdugo today contains arguably what is the largest and most diverse collection of pre-1920s homes in Glendale. We will be featuring several of these unique homes on the tour. And of course, a home tour of Casa Verdugo would not be complete without the Casa Verdugo restaurant from which the neighborhood gets its name. In order to stimulate the ridership of the new line, the Pacific Electric Railway Company developed the Casa Verdugo restaurant at the North Terminus, and now what are the 1,200 blocks of North Brand and North Maryland. And in 1910, the restaurant moved to a lovely 1907 California mission-style home on North Louise, where it was operated until 1921. This house is the only one of the Casa Verdugo locations that still exists, and we are very pleased that the homeowner has agreed to open her home to the home tour this year, and that participants in the home tour will get to view this architecturally and historically significant residence. So once again, that's Sunday, September 29th. The tickets will go on sale in the summer, and we will make an announcement when they are available. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for the tour opportunities. Okay, with that, we'll go to number 5, comments from commissioners. Are there any comments tonight?
I'd just like to make one.
Go ahead.
I would just like to thank the Memorial Day Committee on a splendid commemoration this last Monday in front of the memorial wall at Glendale City Hall on the 27th. I would especially like to thank Don Briggs as Master of Ceremony, Carvel Gray, David Gravorkian, Myrna Stanley, and many others who worked so hard. It was a moving tribute to all those Glendalians who served in the armed forces and fought and died for us.
Thank you.
Should probably mention, I'd like to thank the Glendale Historical Society for sponsoring a workshop on how to create a historic district. I believe it was on Monday, May 20th, about a week ago or so. It had good attendance. I was invited to be one of the speakers, along with Jay Platt and Elaine Wilkerson, and it sounds like we have continued interest in establishing historic districts. So, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, next item is number 6, old business. A, advisory design review, proposed rehabilitation of the Glendale Central Library. And this is a continuation from April 22nd meeting.
And that is not it.
No, we're having a technical issue tonight, so I have to figure out how to get rid of this, which, there we go. And here we go.
There you go. That looks more like it. Oh, and I need the clicker, I guess.
Yeah, this makes it easier. Let me just briefly remind the Commission, this is a continuation of the hearing item we had last month for the rehabilitation of Brand Library. At that point, we didn't have any input from the consultant on the who's now on the project, Historic Resources Group. So each commissioner has received a hard copy of their memo, and that will be discussed by Deborah Gerard, who's leading the project team, and a representative from HRG is also here if you have any questions. Staff continues to believe that the project meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, and the building will retain its eligibility at all potential designation levels. We also support the recommended changes coming from HRG's office and some design modifications that I think will enhance the project.
And just to clarify, this is the Grand Central Library. I think you said
what did I?
Brand Library.
Oh,
but
did
just
I?
so there's no
It's all-
confusion.
I didn't even hear that. But, yeah,
It's
Central,
not the Grand
Central
Central
Library.
Library either, it's the Central Library.
Central Library. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you all for indulging us in another presentation to you. And just very briefly, we're going to talk about the update of the proposed changes, go over Historic Resource Group's review and approval, and then entertain any questions. So hopefully fairly succinct. The project goals remain the same, although we did add national to the list of potential designations. Previously, it was just local and state. Historic Resources Group felt like we could also meet the national standards, so added that into the goals. And so I'm going to go through and just update you on the main points that we were talking about here. So not going back through the history of everything that we showed you last time, but really focusing in on the main interventions that we're doing, which are the north portal, the south portal, the elevator tower and grand stair inside the main space, the toilet room block, which I'll describe further. The east entry tree well and a new one, which we have not exposed you to before, which is shear walls, and it's something that has come up in the last month, and I'll explain it when I get there. So on the north entry portal, this was the rendering that we had showed you a month ago. The portal had an angled overhang and was butt into the face of the concrete beams. It was our desire to change it so that the portal would slip underneath the concrete beam. We found a way to do that. Historic Resources Group asked us to get rid of the angle on the overhang, and so it is now parallel to the face of the building and parallel to the street, which they felt was more consistent with the architecture, the overall architecture. And like I said, the portal does slip underneath the concrete beam now. The north entry plaza remains essentially the same as it did before, except for the change in the overhang. And as far as the portal goes, this is slipping inside the existing concrete beam, slipping underneath concrete columns, slipping underneath the concrete beam. It does give us a slightly lower ceiling height in there, but one that we felt like we could work with, and it accomplished all the architectural and historic preservation goals. The portal on the south, this was a comment that came from you all, is to make sure that we had a consistency in the materiality. We thought that was an excellent comment. So we've got a miniature version of the north portal on the south, also slipping underneath the concrete beam and within the concrete column area, and having the same wood materiality there as well. So the size and shape of it didn't change, just an expression of the materials. On the elevator tower, there were a lot of comments that these were just too big and taking up too much space, as well as the grand stair. These things are in relative proportion to each other on the screen, but they're not. This is not physically their distance. I was just taking advantage of screen space and putting them both on there. But the heavy red dashed outline is an outline of where the elements used to go to in the previous version that we showed you a month ago, and we've made them all smaller. So the grand stair on the right, we made it narrower by a foot. It is still a grand stair. It's 7 feet wide, but it was 8 feet wide. We also unkinked the angle of the stair a little bit, not a huge amount. It still accomplishes our architectural goals of drawing people up the stair, but it's a little less of an intervention in the space, which we felt was, again, a valid comment. And on the left side, this is where the elevator is, and the ramp and the stair, and we just drew that all in significantly to make it, it's, again, still functions in the way we intended, but it takes up much less real estate and draws a little less attention to itself. It's hard to see in a plan view, but the elevator tower we also simplified. So hopefully this, I'm sorry, these always end up a little lighter than I expect them to. But we simplified the shape of the elevator tower, got rid of a lot of the angles. This stuff, this is a section cut through the elevator tower, so it's going to look like this. But in order to make it look like that, it looks like this in its section, so this is how it gets built up to be that shape. But the shape is very much rectangular, without a lot of angularity. We did retain the angularity of supporting the landing, but that is actually structurally driven, so that we have a good structural detail on that. And then we moved the clock from the face of the tower, where it previously was, to the landing. And we thought that was, there was some commentary about the clock wasn't really viewed in the same manner. This was fundamentally from Historic Resources Group, and they really liked the idea of being able to see through the clock and get the transparency. And so by moving it to the landing, we were able to accomplish that, and yet have it be in a very prominent location. And so this is the rendering we showed you a month ago, where the clock was on the face of the elevator tower. The wood you see is kept up with a tall base at the base of the elevator tower, and the stair that was a little wider. And this is now what it looks like. We took the wood all the way down, so it's a very small base, so that the element really reads more like a piece of furniture, more cohesive. We moved the clock off the face of the wood, and we made the stair a little smaller. And then the simplified staircase as well. The toilet rooms. I did not bring a plan. I probably should have to show you where the toilet rooms are. But these are in that east entry portal, what is now the east entry, which will be a decommissioned east entry. And there was a concern about the toilets projecting into that space. And again, this was predominantly a comment from Historic Resources Group. And what they asked us to do was to not bring this front element out so that it could touch the coffers. So they wanted us to hold it back from touching the coffers so that this space was still free and clear and could give the impression that this was not a permanent intervention. I think that's maybe the right way to phrase it. And so we did that. It does give us a slightly lower ceiling height in the lavatory area of the toilet room. We get a larger ceiling height past the concrete beam here, and we go up to a 9-foot ceiling. Underneath there, it's a 7.5-foot ceiling, which is legal, just a little short. But it allowed us to pull this element out underneath the beam and not touch the coffers up above. And so this is an elevation of what that would look like. The front here is the drywall face of the toilet room block. Up above, it's open so that you can still experience the coffers, the lights, the sprinklers, all of that will be untouched. From the side view, so this would be if you're standing in the main space and looking east towards this area, you will see this. And these are two conference room type spaces, as is this. And the toilet rooms are, this area that I was just talking about is behind it. And so this is what you would see from the side. There's a concrete beam that goes across, and above that concrete beam will be nothing. So that one's a little harder to explain, so I apologize. Thanks for letting me take the time on that. Then there's the east entry tree wall, and we had talked about the fact that we were planning on infilling this with planting, but doing it in a manner that was reversible. So we will line the existing paving with a plastic to protect it, and then put gravel down, and then soil and plants, and make this reversible. Just for full disclosure, in order to support that soil or retain that soil, we need a steel plate. The steel plate was the smallest intervention we could come up with. Otherwise, it needed to be masonry or something sturdier. So there will be a steel plate that needs to be anchored through the paving. So there is a minor intervention that is probably not reversible, but will hold back the soil. And this is the existing concrete that rings that creates the ring around the well right now that will be expressed. And so it's reversible and accomplishes what we need architecturally, which is to not have that be an existing depression. And it also, we're holding it back from the tree to make sure that the tree is no better or worse off from light and moisture than it is now. We don't want to be overly nice to it because that could hurt it as much as depriving it of light and moisture. So then we get to the shear walls. Previously, we had not had this element in our project, and this is something that has come up relatively recently. This building is not code required to be upgraded for seismic, but for a variety of reasons, our structural engineer encouraged us to undergo a voluntary seismic upgrade. What that means is that we need to have shear walls. A shear wall is a concrete wall that stiffens the structure that runs from the foundation up to the roof. And in this building, this is a shear wall building, but none of the shear walls are continuous. They're all, because of the overhangs and the different planes, they might go from the second floor up to the roof, but then they don't continue down to the foundation, or they go from the foundation to the second floor, but they don't continue up to the roof. And so our structural engineers told us we need to create 8 locations on each side of the building, 8 locations in the building, 4 on each side of the building, 2 in each direction, so north, south, and east, west, where we can stiffen up the building. And this is really to protect the building, preserve it, help preserve its life, and protect the investment that's being put into this. And so these dark lines here represent the shear walls. And we found locations, and obviously all of this has been run through with Historic Resources Group, but we worked hard to find locations that were as benign as they could be, that didn't interfere with the original architecture, that didn't interfere with the function, and that were fundamentally as invisible as a concrete shear wall can be. So this is on the first floor, and these will all be continuous up and down, but I'll walk you through them on the first floor and then just show you them quickly on the other 2 floors. So this is in the stack area, and it runs east-west in between the stacks. The edge of the grate space is over here. Another one that runs in the other direction here, and because of its proximity to the stairwell, we've put openings in the shear wall so that you can still maintain exiting through there. Another one is on the inside of the outside wall, so not visible from the outside, but on the inside of the outside wall down below here. And then this one, which is doing fundamentally the same thing, is on the inside of the outside wall, but that is also at the loading dock, and I'll show you that when we go down to the lower level. On the other side of the building, on the inside of the outside wall, again, and that one is only visible in a small area right here, and I'll show you the detail of what that will look like. The inside of the outside wall, and that's in a staff-only area. This one is completely buried in a wall behind the toilet room, toilet exhaust, and within a wall cavity. And then this one comes the closest to the main space. The edge of the main space is right here. And we will have an opening through it for visibility and event general functionality. So those are our 8 locations. If we go upstairs, this is the first one I showed you, and it's not visible to the public. It's behind a wall. It does show up in the office area. This one is also not visible to the public. It's, again, in an office wall / corridor wall. This is on the inside of the outside wall, and it would be drywalled over in this location so that it would not be visible as a concrete wall. And the reason for that is it's proud of the plane of the column, and we wanted to differentiate it from the existing concrete work. This is also on the inside of the outside wall, but in a exit corridor, so you won't see it. This one is on the inside. This one is just visible, and that would remain concrete, but it will be differentiated concrete. So where we have that condition, we would have the existing concrete, a reveal, and then the new concrete. For Historic Resources guidance, we will find the same color, so it's got the same general tonality. The texture will be different, and that will be the differentiation. So this will have a lighter sandblast finish. The existing heavier aggregate, exposed, water-washed concrete finish. It's not practical to do in an existing building for starters, and we want to differentiate the new concrete from the old concrete as well. This is behind the auditorium wall, won't be visible. This one is inside the children's room. It will be visible, and again, it will be treated very much in the same manner as the one down in the stack area. And then this guy is not visible to the public. It's in a storage area. So going down to the lower level only exists on the west half, so there's nothing on the east half. This is in a break room area. This is in an open staff office area. This is in a mechanical room. And this one shows up in the loading dock. And the library has a 3-bay loading dock. They don't use the loading dock in the same extent that it was originally designed for. And so we felt like it was the least intervention to actually close off that loading dock with the shear wall. But in order to do that and differentiate, so this is the only concrete that would be visible from the exterior, would be where the existing roll-up door for the loading dock is. And so in order to differentiate this, we are making sure that it does not align with the face of the existing beam, so it is set back in so that the columns and the beams are proud of it, and this wall is tucked back inside. When we're adding this new concrete, this is our general approach to it. So there's currently a chamfer on all of the columns, and we would have that same chamfer on our shear wall with a little reveal so that we're always differentiating it from the old to the new, and then the color would be the same or as close to the same as we can get it, and the texture will be slightly different, a little finer texture, not as much exposed aggregate. And when I talked about the inside of the outside wall, that wall will never be proud of the concrete except where I pointed it out at the loading dock. But otherwise, the concrete doesn't come out any further than the existing columns and beams. So that's kind of an overview of all these interventions. We did get a report from Peyton Hall of Historic Resources Group. Peyton couldn't be here today, but Paul Travis, one of his colleagues, is here in case you have any questions. But to take you through what Peyton's recommendations are, he and Christy reviewed this together and came up with these 7 items that they asked us to do. Fit the north portal under the lower concrete beam and inside the columns, which we did. Color and finish the concrete hardscape at the new north entrance to be similar to the original concrete with subtle differentiation, and that we will do. That's a spec item that we can't physically show you here today. Make the face of the north portal parallel to the face of the building, which we talked about. Add the fill and cover to the pit in a manner that's reversible, which we discussed. Color and finish the concrete shear wall that's open to the exterior of the building, and this is what we were just talking about with a subtle differentiation, not a contrast of color and finish. So that's something that we will continue to make sure that Historic Resources Group is accepting the samples once we have an opportunity to develop those. That really takes a contractor to do a proper sample. Move the transparent clock face away from the elevator tower wall, which we did, and then drop the wall and ceiling lid of the toilet spaces at the existing passageway. And so we've gone through those 7 items. They're all incorporated in the revised proposed interventions. And based on that, this was Peyton's summary, which was that in our Historic Resources Group opinion, following these recommendations in the proposed project will increase the residual integrity of the Glendale Central Library following the work, and the property will remain eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. So with that, we hope that you can also agree that these are reasonable interventions and support this project. And Paul Travis is here if you have any questions of him.
Thank you. Are there any questions while she's here? None. I have just a couple.
Sure.
Does anyone else has questions? I just wanted to confirm on the shear walls, if you can go back to that slide. In the loading dock area, you are filling in The, where the roll-up door is, it's looking still like it's an opening there?
Yeah,
Just to show
and that
where-
we've been,
where it was.
that is something we have been working on, and we are still working on. We are planning for an opening in that shear wall so that there can still be some limited access through there.
Okay.
But it is possible that the library will decide they don't need it. That's something that's still in flux, so we're planning for the worst case, which is this. And if that's not needed, we will remove the opening and have it be a solid wall.
And then what is the thickness of the new shear walls?
So the new shear walls are 18 inches thick, and the existing columns are 18 inches thick. So those two match each other. The effective thickness of them is 16 inches, which is at the narrowest point past the reveal, but the general wall is 18 inches thick. When it's on the inside of the outside wall is 8 inches, and so this will be 10 inches, so that we get a total of 18 inches.
And then my last question, you indicated that it was not code required. Is it not code required at this time and therefore voluntary, but if it was built today, current codes would require it? It's just
That
not
is a
triggering.
reasonable way to phrase it. There is no trigger based on what we're doing for the code to require a seismic upgrade, and so that's what makes it voluntary. But it's been deemed prudent, and but yes, if we were building this building today, code would dictate these shear walls.
And sorry, one more question.
Sure.
Regarding the shear walls, all of these are new from basically slab to roof.
Yes.
You're not tying into any of the existing shear walls that exist in partial.
Yeah, we looked at them, but none of them could be continued.
Okay.
Without architectural changes, and most of them were in overhang areas or something like that. So, yeah, these are all brand new. So,
Some more questions? Any?
I just have one.
Go ahead.
The portal, that's a really good change, I think. Is the protrusion going to be the same with the tuck under? Or-
yes, that did not change. I mean, it changed in the sense that we leveled out an angle,
So-
but we picked a point a little in between. So it didn't come back to the narrowest. It didn't go out to the farthest. So it's approximately a foot from the glass line to the edge of the portal. So there's about a foot of an overhang. And then we repeated that foot of an overhang on the inside and on both sides of the south portal so that there's a consistency.
And how do you, with the pit and the drainage, how does that work? Because, it's lined with plastic, so...
Yeah, so that's a great question. There are the plastic is just to prevent kind of a gross staining
Decomposing
on the brick, but we will be drilling little holes through the grout joints in order to get drainage from the planting down into the well below, and so that's the general game plan.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Paul Travis, did you want to say a few words? Not necessarily. Okay. Do the commissioners need
No.
to hear anything? Okay, thank you.
We've covered it right here.
All right, then we'll close the public session. That's all I have on the, oh, sorry, one more speaker card. My apologies. Reg Mardian?
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm glad to see we're having an evening meeting. I hope it continues. My name is Raj Mardian. I'm one of the board of the directors of the Glendale Historical Society. I'm here on behalf of our president, Greg Grammer, and on behalf of our board of directors to go on the record pertaining the Glendale Central Library. I just want to read a few minutes. I need maybe more than a minute or so, if you allow me. The Glendale Central Library is designed by the prominent architecture firm Welton Beckett Associate and is one of our community's most important civic building. It is a rare, significant example of a modern, brutal style, which is the Glendale Historical Society, which is why the Glendale Historical Society is concerned about the alteration and requested that the historic preservation consultant be on board and involved in the process. While we were disappointed that the historic preservation consultant had not been retained earlier, and we're pleased that the historic group was brought on board to provide independent analysis and preservation expertise to ensure that the proposed alterations are consistent with the Secretary of Interior Standards. We also like to thank Deborah from Gurr & Associates for meeting with us last week to review the HRGH's suggestions and changes, and are glad to see that those recommendations have been incorporated into the revised design. We also support the measures to improve the building structural integrity and the seismic upgrade, and comfortable with the proposed shear walls necessary to have been are necessary and have been sensitively designed. The Glendale Historical Society still has concern with the reorientation of the entrance that offers special relationship to the building, which is an important character-defining feature. However, given HRG's input and evaluation, we are satisfied that the proposed alteration, which we understand are reversible, do not compromise the building architectural integrity and eligibility for listing on the Glendale and the National Register or Californian registers. We also request that the city make local and state landmark designation of this building as a priority. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll close the public session. Any comments from commissioners on the proposed changes?
I'm happy with them. I'm happy with the seismic upgrades. I think it's long overdue, and I know that the library suffered some problems in the 1994 earthquake, so this makes me very happy.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you for the seismic upgrades that are voluntary, and also thank you for taking into consideration some of the comments that we made at our last meeting, and glad to have Historic Resources Group on board. So, thank you.
Just echo the same sentiments. Thank you very much for coming back and for providing additional assurances. And also, we appreciate the issues regarding the shear wall. And, I think that the project is on the right track. And also, personally, I support the reorientation of the entrance. I think if it's done sensitively, which of course is very important, we don't want it to look like something that was just sort of landed from outer space there, that it's well incorporated into the building. I think it'll be a nice addition to the building.
Yes, I concur with my colleagues, and I really appreciate you taking into consideration our comments. I think the portal relationship now between the two sides of the building really helps. I like that it's dropped below the beam. I think that's executed really well. I think the entryway with the reduced stair design, it better fits the scale and makes it much more functional in that area. I think that the shear walls, of which those are never fun to have to place in any building, I think you've really orchestrated those well with the floor plan and the layout of the space, and I think it's going to be minimal impact, so I fully support the project.
I'm just going to say, I think the placement of the clock is really interesting. I'm glad that got moved out.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if you could reopen the public hearing, I forgot to mention that there was one public comment that the office received.
Oh, absolutely. We'll reopen the public hearing.
It's really official. I won't read the entire letter. This is from Harvey Pearson, who is a regular library user, and you each have a copy of this, I believe. And in general, he believes that the project should not go forward as proposed, and is concerned about the changes to the existing configuration and use patterns of the library. And if you want it to be read into the record, we can do that, or if not, it's officially in the record now.
Okay, will this be posted anywhere that the public then can see, or should we read it for their benefit?
It wouldn't be posted. It would be available in the file, which is available for public review, but we can go ahead and read it.
I think we'll read it.
Read it.
Okay. Dear Chairperson and other honorable members of the Glendale Historic Preservation Commission, I don't see how converting the Central Library's cloistered, traditionally focused persona into a quote-unquote community living room, replete with two new entrances that would be mainly used as a public shortcut conduit between two major commercial areas in downtown Glendale, the Americana on the south, plus all along nearby Maryland Avenue to the north. A long sentence. So It would be a public shortcut conduit that would very likely be used by multitudes of passers-through, as it were, on their way from one said area to the other, perhaps with a stop-off to use the library's already overtaxed restrooms. How this would help, he doesn't see how this would help preserve its traditional, iconic place in Glendale's storied history. Plus, as purportedly already planned, closing off the public from being able to use the current traditional main entrance to the east would hardly constitute a contribution to its traditional best use. Furthermore, what would happen to the various extant parking areas? Assuming that they are part of the library's traditional emphasis on pragmatic function, the parking facilities might have to be at least partially destroyed. Trying to paraphrase a little bit. For example, any south-facing entrance would seem to have to intrude on many of these much-needed parking spaces in its would-be contiguous parking lot. And so the parking facilities might at least be partially destroyed, with driving library users thus being practically forced to have to drive up or down Louise Street, for example, and then across Harvard Street and into that faceless, colorless, technically off-white on the outside, red tape-involved three-story parking structure on Maryland Avenue. These sentences are long and very good.
They're great.
Thank you very much for your well-crafted consideration. Sincerely, Harvey Pearson.
Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot about that before.
That's important. Thank you. Okay, so with that, do we,
Close the public hearing and
okay, so we'll
make
close
a-
the public hearing again.
Yeah, and make a motion for an advisory recommendation.
Is there a motion for advisory recommendation to proceed with the plan?
Read.
I'll move. Is there a written motion?
We don't
somewhere?
have one yet.
Okay.
This is-
I'll move that we consider the the revised proposal for the renovation of the Central Library as revised, and recommend approval of the plan as revised.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian,
Yes.
Madam Chair Shire.
Yes.
That passes. Thank you. 4-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have 6B.
Yes.
Consideration of commissioner-generated proposals for future discussions regarding HPC policies and goals.
And we don't have anything new on the list. We are tonight going to discuss protocol for meetings, covering some of the issues we just experienced. And we have kind of a cheat sheet that we'll talk about. That's kind of a work in progress, but this is probably what it's going to be like in the final version.
That's fine. No comments. Then we'll just move on to 7, new business. 7A, proposed Brockmont Park Historic District, review of the Historic Resources Survey, and authorization of distribution of petition requesting Historic District. Do you want to give us an overview first, Jay?
Sure. I didn't prepare a PowerPoint specifically for this meeting, but I have the PowerPoint that we used at the community meeting that we held last week, and I won't go through every slide, but we'll look at a few of these. Basically, the Brockmont Park Historic Resources Survey has been completed. It was the product of the work of staff, as well as one of the project applicants, Francesca Smith, who is a qualified historic preservation consultant, architectural historian on the project. And I believe she'll testify tonight that she thinks this meets professional standards, as do I, which is one of the important aspects of completing one of these resources or resource surveys. Running through this, we obviously wanted to place this in context to show that Brockmont Park is going to, if it is ultimately designated, be the 6th of the city's designated historic districts. And we shared with the public that we are now in the process where the commission is being asked to approve the survey if you feel that the survey meets professional standards and that its conclusions are sound. We're then allowed to allow the applicants to move forward in the process, which means that there will be a petition to be distributed among the homeowners within the proposed historic district that will ask the city to designate the historic district. And at that point, we'll require over 50% of the homes owners of that number of homes will have to sign this petition to keep this moving forward in the process. So we shared with the community that the Historic Resource Survey consists of two parts. One, it starts out talking about the history and the character of the area. We want to be able to place the individual properties and make assessments about their significance in relation to the historic district based on kind of a sound study of the historic background of the area. Here's the map showing the 59 parcels, all of which contain single-family residences that are part of the that are proposed as the Brockmont Park District. We shared a bit of the history, looking back to John Brockman's estate, built in 1910, when there was nothing else in Brockmont Park. Even his clock tower, I don't know if, I can't tell if it would have been visible in this image or not, but here we have the great picture showing the flatland area, which is proposed as the historic district where the orchards are, the Brockman House from 1910 and the clock tower from 1914. Brockman was an interesting figure. He made his fortune in the gold and silver mines in New Mexico and Arizona, came to Los Angeles, became influential real estate developer, businessman, built the Brockman Building in downtown Los Angeles at 7th and Grand, thank you, 7th and Grand. And chose Glendale as kind of his country home. So this was a country estate in the foothills where the air was clean and there was no disease, and the reason many people came to Glendale in the early part of the 20th century. I made sure to show this to everyone because he seems like such a mean-looking man here, but here he looks kind of cute, and he had a herd of deer on the estate, so it was a huge tract of land, and he really made the most of it. He had a lake on the estate, kind of down in the flat area, obviously. He ran electric lights through the whole area, so there was kind of a lot of advanced architectural thinking there. And the house itself is a significant building, very interesting architecturally. When he died in 1925, the estate was sold, and the Home Realty Company acquired the land and developed the Brockmont Park subdivision. Brockmont coming from his name for his house. John Brockman's house was called Brockmont, obviously because it was on the mountain. And then we prepared this kind of overview slide just to show, kind of superimpose the proposed district to give a sense of where the streets are and what area is included in the district. The actual Brockmont Park tract did include other areas further up the hill, so it can basically be divided into kind of the flatland portion of the tract and the hillside portion. When we were studying this in terms of developing a boundary, we did see that there were significant changes in the character in the flatland areas compared to the hillside areas, and we chose the boundary partly for that reason and partly because this is what the applicants were able to handle, which is very typical of our historic district process. There is potential room to expand the Brockmont Park District in the future, and we've already been speaking internally about making some revisions to our historic district ordinance to make the process for expanding a district clear. Right now, we only have a process for designating new districts. So in the coming months, that's something we'll be working on. We haven't heard specifically that anyone wants to expand Brockmont Park, but several of our districts have potential for expansion. One of the interesting features of Brockmont Park that reminds us of Rossmoyne a little bit is that there was a park that was included as part of the subdivision. This one was, in theory, a private park for the exclusive use of residents. We didn't know where the park was located for a while, and this is a little bit blurry, but if you look at this detail, there's an oval-shaped parcel here, and I will quickly go back to this parcel here with this oval shape was the location of the park. What is kind of interesting is this document comes from a study of the entire city to kind of work on a general plan for the city by Harlan Bartholomew and Associates in 1930, and they felt that there weren't enough parks in Glendale, which is still a problem we have today, and they thought that there could be an expansion of Brockmont Park into this area just below the oval, which, if you can see the street grid here, is pretty much the entire historic district proposed today would have been part of that expanded park. So my guess is the residents are very happy that we never got that park. As with many of our other kind of foothill historic districts, Brockmont Park has a really fantastic collection of period revival homes, as is typical, really great examples of Spanish colonial revival, some very nice Monterey revivals, colonial revivals, Tudor revival, a couple of minimal traditional houses, not as many as we've seen in some of our other historic districts, a smattering of modern style, kind of not cutting edge modern, but definitely taking the principles of modernism to heart. But what we found that was really interesting in Brockmont Park is there are a lot of ranch houses from the 1950s. And when we looked at the development pattern, and I can't remember, I have the slide here. This is a sandboard map from just before just kind of around 1951, 1950 or so. And you see that Brockmont Park wasn't filled out. A lot of parcels hadn't been subdivided. This is the park here. So there was one house built in the park in 1940, so we don't know really how long that park existed or what really happened there. But 2 ranch houses were subsequently built on the parkland, and then this area is all of Brockman's estate. These are the gardens at the south foot of the house. So ranch houses were built here, and then there were other locations within the district where there were empty spaces. So the ranch houses become a real important part of the story of Brockmont Park because as it met its final subdivision with the loss of the park and the final portions of his estate that were subdivided, as well as the empty spaces inside the subdivision, we find that the ranch houses are important. This slide shows light blue, or primarily the ranch house development, and you can see the earlier Brockman House from 1910, and then a mix, as we've seen in our other historic districts, of houses from the 20s and 30s. Unlike other districts, there was no construction in Brockmont Park during World War II, and which is sort of what you'd expect, but what surprises us at some of our other districts is that there was a fair amount of construction during that period. So, as we get more historic districts and we start being able to compare their developmental histories, we see that they share a lot of qualities, but that each neighborhood has kind of some unique features that kind of set them apart and help tell a different part of the story of Glendale. 2 properties are individually designated in Brockmont Park. The Brower House, which you designated several years ago, was the home of the Reverend Brower, who was the long-time Methodist.
Baptist.
Baptist, yeah, I always get those 2 confused. You've got to work on that. Longtime minister of the First Baptist Church. And then also the clock tower building at the Brockman House is designated, but the remainder of the property isn't designated, which makes a very curious situation. The current owners recently purchased the house, have told me that they are interested in bringing this forward for individual nomination. So hopefully that will come to pass. And the other thing that was noticed in Brockmont Park is that we have a lot of attention to the placement of street trees, with different species lining different streets, which again gives it kind of a unique character. And it's important to remember that when we think about historic districts, it's not just a collection of houses, but it's a collection of the entire environment that makes up that neighborhood. So these street trees are called out in the Historic Resource Survey as an important component of the character and the history of the district. I don't think I need to remind the Commission how we determine contributors and non-contributors in a historic district, but for the public, we have 2 aspects that we look for. We determine a period of significance for the district. When was the first significant aspect of its development initiated, and when was the district basically completed as the area we know today? So we have beginning and ending times. A contributor to a historic district was built within the period of significance and may have some alterations, but hasn't been so altered that it's lost its ability to tell its story. It still can be read as a 1920s Spanish or a 1930s colonial revival. A non-contributor may be a building that was built either before or after the period of significance, or a building that's been altered so dramatically that we believe it's lost its historic integrity. So one of the duties of the survey team is to look at individual properties and prepare survey forms, and we document what the historic character defining features are on the property, and then we also look to see what alterations have been made, and then we weigh whether a building has high integrity, moderate integrity, and low integrity. If a building is built in the period of significance and has high or moderate integrity, meaning a few things may have been changed, but it's basically still there, we will consider it to be a contributor. If a building has lost its integrity, it becomes a non-contributor. So here is the date range of buildings built in Brockmont Park. You can see a slow start because it was still the Brockman House up until his death in 1925. And, modest growth in the early years, not quite as rapid as we've seen in some of our other districts. The lull during World War II, and then the burst that came in the early 50s. And that's, again, part of the story of how post-war development all through Glendale really just boomed during that period, including in some of our older neighborhoods. For our period of significance, we looked at these dates. Because the area was part of the Brockman estate, we include Brockman's house as the beginning of the date range of 1910. And then we looked at 1954, when the last of these 18 houses was built, as the closing period. We didn't think that the last house was built in 1959, and there was just too much of a gap between the burst of construction and that house to include that as a contributor. Here's an example of our survey form, which lays out what elements we see on the house today, and it's important for everyone to remember that a house as it is today is what is designated. We don't expect or demand that any changes be made. We only work with people once work is proposed inside the historic district. These are status codes. Here's a map of contributors. So this is one of the key aspects that's important for the Commission today. We have a couple of thresholds that have to be met for you to determine that it's appropriate to move forward in the process. Of the 59 houses in Brockmont Park, as proposed, 52 are contributors, 88%, well over the 60% that's required by the ordinance, and also one of our highest numbers of any of our proposed districts so far. We also have 9 criteria for designation built into the district ordinance, and we assess each application against all 9 of those, and we found that Brockmont Park meets 4 of them. The ordinance requires that you only meet 1 of them. So again, the proposed district exceeds the standards that are laid out in the ordinance. And this was the last slide I gave, and this concludes my presentation. Francesca Smith is here if you would like to hear from our colleague working on the survey report.
Yes, please, Francesca Smith.
Hi.
Hi.
You want to hear from me?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you for hearing this item, and we thank the Planning Department staff who's worked so hard with neighbors on this. I believe that the report that you're reviewing was prepared in conformance with federal guidelines on the subject. I wanted you to know my husband and I moved to Glendale after coming to an HPC meeting in 2003 where another district was being presented. And I said, we're moving to Glendale. It worked. It was Cumberland Heights. I think Brockmont Park is a pretty unique neighborhood of period revival, mostly builder-designed homes. The trees, the winding streets, as well as the grids, the regular street grid streets. The streetlight standards also contribute. There were some other, significant people who lived in Brockmont Park. A guy named George Fox, who was, I think, the Fox something or other lumber company, and another guy whose name was Montaña, who was the Secretary of State of Bolivia at one time. One of the things about our ranch-style houses that brings them into the period revival is there are a few ranch-style homes that are transitional. There are 2, at least, English revival sort of ranch-style houses, and they're more ranch because of the form, but they definitely have elements of English revival style. The fact that it was kind of a planned community makes it a little bit special in Glendale. I urge you to approve the survey and authorize circulating the petition, if you would. And if you have any questions, Jay can probably answer them.
Thank you.
And let me just add that the surveys are typically works in progress to some degree. We just heard from a resident today who informed us that we got the type of roof material on their house wrong. So we investigated that and agree that, we made that change already. Francesca has noted several points and a few down to the details of footnotes that aren't consistent or missing. All of that will be taken care of before this goes to council, and so before it comes back to you. But before a district is finally approved, we want the report to be as accurate as possible. So we'll be taking in any information from the public. If they think we got something wrong on our survey forms, we're going to do our best to make sure it's accurate when this document is finally approved. So.
Great, thank you so much. We have a couple other speakers on this topic. Rockmont Park. Next is Sean Bursell.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the Commission. I'm Sean Bursell with the Glendale Historical Society. The Glendale Historical Society enthusiastically supports approval of the Rockmont Park Historic Resources Survey. And as Mr. Platt mentioned, this survey found an impressive 88% of the 59 homes here are contributors, and also found that the proposed district meets 4 of the 9 designation criteria. Personally, I was not familiar with this neighborhood, even though I live a short distance away. So I went over and I checked it out, and this really is a gem of a neighborhood. It really is a neat little area, kind of just off Kenneth Road. And there's a great mix, as Mr. Platt showed us, a great mix of architectural styles, including period revival, minimal, traditional, ranch, and modern, that really reflect the changing architectural aesthetic of Glendale in the first half of the 20th century. And we believe that the character of this neighborhood is definitely worth maintaining, and therefore the Glendale Historical Society hopes that the homeowners there agree. We therefore recommend that the Commission authorize the applicants to circulate the petition to designate the Historic District Overlay Zone for Rockmont Park. Finally, I would like to commend Ms. Smith for her excellent work putting together the initial application and the Historic Resources Survey. As some of you up on the dais know, that how much hard work that is involved with that, and so we really do commend her for her effort on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Dana Doyle.
I'm a resident homeowner, live at 1514 Valley View Road, and am in favor of proposed Rockmont Park.
Thank you. Next speaker, Richard Leboff.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commission staff, and commissioners. I am Richard Leboff. I'm a 34-year resident of our city of Glendale, and I'm very happy to be before you this evening. I was here, in fact, I looked back on my notes, and it's hard to almost believe that we began this process approximately just December 13th, 2010. So that's going on about 3.5 years ago, which is certainly a long period of time. I certainly hope that the approval of the petition and the approval of council, needless to say, will not take as long, because we feel distinguished, of course, to be the 6th historical district in Glendale, and we hope that there will be many that will come after us. It's essential that we have historical districts in Glendale, as I think everyone here this evening recognizes. It's something that we all feel is long overdue for our jewel city. I'd like to also, while I'm up here, of course, commend Jay Platt and his staff for their diligent work in terms of getting the survey together. That's something that obviously is a very comprehensive tool that's necessary in order for this process to move forward. And I also would also like to commend Francesca, since she has, of course, been a very notable person in terms of moving this process forward. I think if we did not have neighbors like Francesca, we would not be here today. So I, like others who have come before you, are very much in favor of the petition moving forward, and I hope that we will have the petition, in fact, approved post haste, so that hopefully, maybe even before the end of this calendar year, that we do have the 6th Historical District in Glendale. So I thank you for your time, and Jay and your staff, I thank you too.
Thank you very much. Okay, the last speaker on this topic, Christina Yepes.
I'm Christina Yepes, and my husband and I own the home at 1555 Valley View Road. And while I commend the efforts and the thought to make the neighborhood historical, I have to say I'm in opposition to it because it doesn't take into account everybody's feelings within the neighborhood. There are people who were not presented with the petition. There are people who are not in favor of the historical overlay for the whole community. And I have to say that I support the individual's homeowners' rights to be able to alter their property. That's why we have the design review board already, to be able to make sure that there's conservative changes and changes that are within the scope of the feel of the community. But to add more regulation and more government, you know, we pay a lot of money to live in the neighborhood in a house that you presume to own. And what the neighborhood is proposing is an entire overlay that encompasses even non-willing or non-interested parties without any kind of opt-out clause in it. And it's really something that is being forced upon the community by a small section. So in order for this process to get started, they only needed like 20-25% of the votes. Nobody came to our home. Nobody came to our neighbor's home. They just needed a very small section of people to be interested. And I think a lot of the people were really upset because of the massacre that happened at the Lawson House in terms of its poor architectural follow-through. So I think that's the purpose of the Design Review Board, and we already have mechanisms in place to try to prevent that kind of architectural disaster within the community. And I just don't think it's necessary to try to further restrict the individual rights of the homeowner, because we pay our taxes. We pay a lot of money in taxes. We pay a lot of money in our mortgages to live here. We pay a lot of money to improve our properties. And as individual homeowners, you should be able to have the right to keep and maintain your home either historically or not, because that is the American way. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Mary Loreco.
Lauriera, sorry.
Oh, Lauriera.
My name is not very
No
good,
problem.
so, good evening. My name is Mary Catherine Lauriero, and I am a resident on Merriman Drive within the proposed district. And I just wanted to express my support for the proposed historic district. I think we live in a lovely neighborhood, and I just would sure hate to see it change any more than it has. And for the record, I had no problem with the Lawson Place Drive, Lawson home. It's beautiful. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now our last speaker.
Maybe.
Eric Yepes, maybe. Hello.
Hello, Council. This is the first time I've ever done this. I grew up in Glendale. I came here when I was 12 years old. I went to Hoover, Toll Hoover, and I love the city. I left for a little while, came right back. I bought this house in this neighborhood, which, I grew up and I loved. And the reason being is that, what I do in law enforcement as a police officer, working in Los Angeles, dealing with a lot of neighborhoods that I've seen, distressed and change. I wanted to come to a city that I knew there would be definitely some stabilization, and Glendale offered that to me. But I also understand that it's my right to, if I want to make my property better. And I have a beautiful house in Glendale, don't get me wrong, and so many others, and I'm not trying to create anything or do anything that's outside of that, but if I want to do something differently with it or make it even grander than what it is, I want to have that right. And I feel that this historic thing is going to impede or cumber me from doing any type of changes. So I am not for it at all in any way, shape, or form. And I know there's a lot of residents that also have that fear. And so I just want to make it clear that, there is definite opposition to this, and that I hope that you guys take a real hard look at this before you decide to move forward with this. This is the reason I came here. This is the reason I want to stay. But I know that if this changes, I know this is not someplace I can stay to. Because what I want to do, I won't be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll close the public session. Any discussion amongst the commissioners?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Couple questions. Well, yeah, I think it's for Jay, just to clarify a couple of things. We talked a little bit about landscape, streetscape, and also, I think, mention of lampposts.
Right.
Are those incorporated into the plan?
Those are called out
designation?
as character features of the neighborhood. They're all on city-owned property, so they're in the in the right of way. So if the city at some point decided to replace the lampposts, we would come in, as we did in Ross Moines, and say, no, those are actually identified as a character feature of the area. Let's come up with other solutions. Same with the street trees. We wouldn't necessarily protect every single street tree, depending on what happens and things die and all of that. But once it's identified, we would know what an appropriate replacement tree would be. For example, if a tree had to be taken down because it was diseased or something, we wouldn't just go to the street tree palette. We'd say we know what belongs on this street, and it's really on three of the streets where there's a preponderance of similar trees.
And there were 7 non-contributors in the district. Are these houses that fall outside? I know I've read the thing, I'm just trying to reiterate a few points here. Are these properties that fall outside the period of significance, or have been altered?
Just one of them is a non-contributor because it's outside the period, and the others have been altered.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. I'll also start by just commending Jay and the city staff and Ms. Smith for all of the work putting this historic resources survey together, because it really is a huge task. It's, you have to go to each property, you have to make notations, it's a lot of documentation, and that was a lot of work. I also did not really know much about this neighborhood, and I've driven through it, of course, as I've made my way through the city, usually driving around looking at beautiful homes. I do really appreciate the high level of historic integrity in the neighborhood. One of the things that struck me about and I think Mr. Brockman definitely is a figure of note, and I appreciated in the staff report, I think in his obituary, it said he was characterized as one of the most picturesque figures of the Southwest. He was a soldier, a miner, a pioneer, and a capitalist whose life story apparently read like a Western novel. I mean, it's all very romantic. And there's that one fabulous picture of the estate above the orange groves. And can I ask you to switch over there, because I just think that's such a nice visual to look at while we're talking about this. And then
There we go.
Jay showed the photo with Mr. Brockman and the deer, and he seemed like he was a sensitive man.
Or a ruthless capitalist.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I wasn't going to say that. I think one of the things that struck me as well as I was reading through the survey was the fact that the marketing for this neighborhood at the time, and not just for this neighborhood, but we saw that in Ross Moines as well, really talked about preservation. But that was preservation of the natural resources in the neighborhood, and that was an appreciation for old trees, mature landscaping, shrubs, and all of that. And I think it's so nice that today we're talking about preserving that special built environment, and by extension, 80 or 90 years later, still preserving the vision of the original developers of this area, which was to preserve the natural beauty. So I kind of had a little epiphany when I was reading through the report. And I'm obviously supportive of the district moving forward with circulating a petition requesting a historic district overlay. You have met the requirements with 88% of the homes being contributors, where 60% is required. You've met 4 of the 9 criteria for a historic district. 40%, well, that's before the Historic Resources Survey, but 40% of your homeowners apparently signed requesting a Historic Resources Survey. And the requirement by ordinance is that at least 50% of homeowners sign the final petition requesting a historic district. But as Jay has pointed out before, City Council, I think, generally would like to see at least 70%. And that's what we've seen in our other districts so far. To speak to the homeowners who aren't comfortable moving forward with a historic district, and I was one of the applicants for the Ross Moines Historic District, and I worked on that project for about 3 years, and we had 500 homes in that area. There is a DRB process today. Homeowners, as you stated, there is a process. Homeowners cannot do whatever they want with their home. And also we have a wonderful set of guidelines which speak to each home style in historic districts. And I think there are 13 different established home styles. And you may want to look at it in terms of having those guidelines actually gives a homeowner more assurances going into the process for making changes, because you can go to the section of those guidelines which address your style of home. And it doesn't mean that you can't make changes, that you couldn't make additions, that you couldn't add a second story, that you couldn't do things with your home. The guidelines would help you up front understand what would be appropriate, just so that your home would continue to fit into the general character of the neighborhood. And that's only what can be seen from the public right-of-way. And I'm going to hope that, that has all been addressed to you by the people who have been circulating the petitions, and I'm sure Mr. Platt would be happy to talk to you a little bit more about that if you have additional concerns. But I think the process has been set up just to assure that a majority of people obviously are approving the district, and that there are processes in place so that changes can still be made, because the ordinance does recognize that change will take place over time. So those are my comments. Thank you so much for all your work on this and all your support.
Any other comments?
Yes, I agree with Commissioner Vartanian exactly on the same things. To address the homeowner, it says if the homeowners of over 50% of the area's properties sign, the nomination will move forward. I think that they've worked very hard, and they deserve to have at least to go in front of the rest of the homeowners and have them the ability to sign for this. I do believe it will probably make the 70% because I think it is beneficial for the area, and I think in the end you will find out that it will be definitely beneficial for you. I would like to thank Francesca Smith and Chester and Rebecca Maxwell and Robert Snyder for nominating Brockmont Park for Historic District status back in December of 2010 and shepherding this district toward being a new historic district for Glendale. I remember when Ms. Maxwell came asking for more time to gather signatures back in 2011, and obviously they've done so. We now have a draft of the resource survey, and I agree with staff to allow the petition among homeowners requesting that the city designate the proposed historic district overlay zone, and I feel that they have done the work and they deserve at least that right. The district meets and surpasses all the designation thresholds established by the historic district overlay zone, and we've heard them all. 88% of the properties contribute when only 60% is mandated. 52 out of 59 are contributing. We've done 4 of the historic district ordinances, 4 are met. The historic district outline of Lower Brockmont Park is wholly appropriate for this district, with the houses in this historic district representing the south half of the tract map. Maybe at a later time, the northern portion of Brockmont Park, which has now just been addressed, will seek their own historic district. I could go on to the history of some of the people, but I'm very happy to know that Mr. Fox of Fox Woodsum Lumber lived up there. That I didn't know, and he was very important in the history of early Glendale. Brockmont Park, finally, with its notable architecture, the significant number of trees on each of its streets make Brockmont Park a place to amble as the developers envisioned and a worthy addition to Glendale's 5 other historic districts. So I agree with the survey.
Thank you. Make a comment. All I did was ask questions, so I'll make a comment. Just a wonderful job, and you know, when you come from someplace like Chicago, which is where I come from, and you come to California, it's just so delightful to get enthusiastic about architecture because you see incredible examples of the way the community developed. In an example of a ranch-style house with English, detailing, and you can almost see a neighborhood in an area evolving, and the story of the neighborhood by the way the architecture evolves. It's just so incredibly eclectic and interesting. And I'm familiar with Brockmont. I have a couple friends who live in the hills up above you, and so I've walked around the neighborhood, had the privilege of being able to see the Brockman house before it was sold. And, it's really a delightful, beautiful area with the historic district boundary so carefully established that you can almost see the thing coming alive in the application. So thank you all very much for everything you've done. I think when you comment last, you get to say you agree with your colleagues, which is nice. But to those of you who are still not too sure that you're on board with this, I hope that the remainder of the process, the final petitioning and the discussion will help you think a little bit more favorably on it, because I think what it does for you, unlike the design review process, which is a great process, but the historic districting process gives your house stability and gives you guidance on how you want to remodel it in the context of the neighborhood itself, which is so important. And I think, the guidelines that Lorna mentioned are so well thought of, not only in Glendale, but in the whole community of historic preservationists and throughout the whole greater LA area. Our guidelines are considered to be some of the most well thought out and instructive in terms of what you can do not only to keep the beauty of your historic home, but maintain its value, not only for yourself, but for the entire neighborhood as a collection of homes. So, I hope there's more discussion amongst all of you in the neighborhood as you proceed with your petitioning, which I'm very enthusiastically supporting. And I'd just like to say thank you all so much, all of you, for being here and for weighing in and for what you're doing for our community. All of us. This is a benefit to everybody, not just the people in Brockmont. So thank you so much.
Well, I definitely agree with my fellow commissioners, and wanted to thank Francesca Smith and the very invested neighbors that have been so involved in this process. I also want to thank the neighbors who are in opposition, because you're very bold to come forward today, and we appreciate varying degrees of opinion, and that's what makes a community. And I would hope, too, that we can kind of, appease you as far as thinking that you can't make changes or you might be so restrictive. I know City of Glendale, with Design Review Board already, there are processes in place to have additions or changes made being reviewed, and I think what you'll find, if this goes forward, is that the Historic Preservation staff member, Jay Platt, is very reasonable. I think the commission is fairly reasonable. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now that we're just looking at the next step. And what I wanted to also say is, early on there was only, say, 25% required to take it to the next step until the historic survey is done. And you don't even know if it would remotely qualify with the contributing number of houses and properties there. So we're really at the point where now it's important for all of you to weigh in, and now it's important that the petition will continue on to get all the homeowners to weigh in on this, and you should definitely have a chance at that, to express your opinion and to sign or to not sign. And so with that said, I support this petition, or support the petition going forward, so we can determine if the neighborhood is in support of this historic district. Is there a motion going forward?
So,
And the motion would be to approve the Historic Resources Survey and authorize the proponents to distribute the petition asking for a historic district.
I will make that motion.
I will second that motion.
Roll call, please.
Okay, sure. Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Enthusiastically, yes.
Madam Chair Shire? Motion to approve 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next
Thank
on the
you.
agenda, we have 8, which is Planning Division updates and informational briefings. And the first one is A, appointment of an HPC commissioner to the Planning Process Task Force.
And this item is something coming to the Community Development Department from City Council. There's kind of a goal of streamlining some of our review processes in the department to kind of enhance the experience of applicants coming to us, to kind of move things forward in some cases at a faster pace. And it's a pretty big topic, and so community development has decided to convene we're calling it the Planning Process Task Force. And among many members of the community, we're reaching out to the business community, to real estate community, to homeowners associations, and we also would like to have representation from our various boards and commissions. And so we were hoping that we could get a volunteer, and if more than one person was interested, possibly an alternate. We're looking at a series of how many meetings, Alan?
At the moment, I think we're planning about 5, maybe 6.
Yeah, five meetings to be held over several months. And the input we get from the task force members will go toward helping us determine what the best way to kind of streamline some of the processes are.
Well, I would like to recommend, appoint Lorna Vartanian, if you'd be interested and willing to serve your time. I think your experience would be great in that area, and you could really benefit and represent as well. I don't know if there's other people interested, or...
Do we need a vote? I'll second that.
We should ask Lorna first.
You're in, Lorna.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'd be very happy to do that. I'd be very happy
I would be honored to have her.
participate. Oh,
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and then would you like to be considered an alternate? We're not sure at this point if we're going to have official alternates, but we do want to have representation at the meetings.
I'd like to be an alternate, but I would...
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Do we need to vote on that, or?
No, not really.
No?
I think
Just
it's
informal?
fairly
Okay.
informal as long as everyone's
Thank you both.
agreeing about it. So.
Sounds like a good process.
Yes. with the best person.
Okay, then we'll move on to 8B. This is a review of protocol for conduct of HPC hearings. And this is actually an agenda item I had requested staff or Jay to put together just to advise us. I felt like at our last meeting, things were a little bumpy and maybe I didn't really lead some difficult conversations well, knowing kind of what protocols we have in place. If there's a motion on the table that's seeming to die without a second, can we retract it? Like, what are our options, just so we can go forward in better representing the public in this hearing? So, turn it over to you.
So what we've done, and I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a preliminary kind of stab at this. The ultimate document is something that we'll give to you and to be placed in your Historic Preservation Commission handbook, and then also to use at the dais during meetings. This is based on a document that's used by the Planning Commission, and we all run meetings more or less the same way. When we started looking into it, we looked at Robert's Rules of Orders, which is the official parliamentary procedure handbook. It's so complicated, it takes things so far beyond things that we regularly deal with that we don't want to go there. But the reason we didn't finalize this is because we were talking to the city attorney's office, and evidently they have some of this material already prepared, but we weren't able to get it in time for today's meeting. So I could just run you through this really quickly and then address the specific issue that came up. But the way we've put this together is almost like a script for the chair or the vice chair or whoever's acting as chair at a meeting to kind of follow. So our goal would be to have this on the table, on the dais at all hearings. The important part is where we're really dealing with old business and new business, where the commission is voting on things, making motions, seconding motions, and reading things through. So we just kind of put together bullet points of, when the public meeting is opened, what happens during that period. So the chair would read the agenda title of the hearing item, would officially open the public hearing with or without the gavel. Commissioner Shire chooses not to use the gavel. Some people choose to. It's personal choice, and I support your choice. There's a call for the staff report, so after the item's open, there's generally a staff report. If the commissioners have questions after the staff report, that's the time to address them directly to the staff person delivering the report. After that is done, if there are questions or if not, the applicant is asked to come forward. We have been very informal in the Historic Preservation Commission about time limits. Some of our commissions are a little more set in terms of an applicant having 5 minutes to speak, members of the public having 3 minutes to speak. If the commission chose to go in that direction, we certainly could. The reason I think we've been informal is because we really don't have the kinds of meetings where we have, a lot of speakers, a lot of anger, a lot of, contests, but we certainly could, and we're prepared to establish firm time limits if you'd like. After the applicant finishes speaking, the commissioners can ask questions directly of the applicant, so it's ideal to have those questions kind of formulated while you're listening. Inevitably, we have questions that come up later, and there's a process for that, but if we can get them out earlier, that's better. After the applicants answered questions, we ask for other members of the public who submitted speaker cards. What I'll add here, I think it's a good rule of thumb to just, at some point, probably toward the beginning of the hearing, make sure that everyone who intends to speak has submitted a card or at least knows that they're available, because as we saw today, some people decide halfway through, I'm going to say something. So I think I'll add that toward the top of this. This is something that we haven't always been good about, but I think it's really important, especially for design review issues where we do get community members coming out and, not always supporting a project, to let the applicant rebut any comments that are made. So we definitely need to include a rebuttal period after the final public speaker has finished. Once all of that's done, then we close the public hearing, which means that, and we have people still raising their hand and trying to speak, and that's where the chair has the discretion in some cases to reopen a public hearing. But in general, discussion is ended with the public, and the commissioners begin their deliberation. The chair will generally ask a colleague to start. And what we learned today is that there are some, and this is addressing what happened at the last hearing, if there's some clarification that's required, questions can be asked of staff or even members of the public. If you just have a question, did you say your roof is going to be brown or black? You can ask that without reopening the public hearing.
Oh.
If there's any potential for new information to be brought into the discussion, then officially the public hearing has to be reopened. It's probably safer just to do that in general because you never know what's going to lead to what. So our recommendation would be to reopen the public hearing if the commission suddenly thinks there's a question for the applicant or for staff that might bring up new information. The chair will then offer his or her comments after all of the commissioners have finished with their deliberation. And once those comments are finished, the chair will ask if there's a motion. And in general, we have, two main types of hearings. There'll be a motion to designate, to recommend approval of a Glendale Register nomination, for example, or a Mills Act contract. Those motions, we have tried, not always successfully, to have a written motion on the table for everyone, whoever decides to offer that motion. For other things like design review, we'll have a series of potential motions to approve a project, approve with conditions, return for redesign, or ultimately possibly to deny a proposal. So those will be added to this list, and those are kind of design review motions. And those will be found in the design review staff report. There'll be motions, but what the commissioners have to know is that very often you have to, you have to work on your feet, and a motion has to be tailored to, where the discussion went. The motion is also the time where we add conditions. If we have Mills Act conditions, and then, like I said, for design review, we often will be adding conditions to the staff recommendation. Once the motion is out in the air, the chair will ask for a second. If there is a second, then we just go straight to a vote, and majority wins. In the advent of a tie vote, for example, today, if we had had a vote that was 2-2, the chair will ask for a motion to continue the item to a date certain, probably to the next hearing. Hopefully we'd have a quorum at that hearing, or not a quorum, but hopefully we'd have a tie-breaking vote at that hearing and be able to move forward. When a motion passes, the chair will say the motion is passed, read the vote. The staff person, Armanet, in our case, will take a roll call of the commissioners and ask for the vote. So this is all pretty standard. This is all stuff that you guys do regularly. If a motion doesn't pass, there are two options. One is, actually, did I skip? There's something where you pass the gavel.
Right, that's 3 from the bottom.
3 from the bottom, right. Okay, so let's go back up there. If there is no motion and the chair would like to move this forward, or the chair believes that the chair wants to make that motion, the chair can pass the gavel first to the vice chair or to another colleague, and then officially you're no longer chair at that point, and then you can make a motion and see if you can get a second.
So we need the gavel.
It's always there, yeah. You can pass the metaphorical gavel, yeah. Virtual gavel. So ultimately, we need to get a second. If there is no second, the motion dies, and the chair can call out that the motion dies and entertain other motions. But what's important to remember, and I think this came up last time also, is that you can make a motion or you can second a motion even if you don't support what's being discussed, because you can vote negatively against a motion also. And so we don't necessarily have to let a motion die and then recraft a motion that's the exact opposite of it. We can just take a vote that becomes a negative vote. So that's what we have now. We're just kind of waiting to see what we get from the city attorney, if there's any information that we think will be useful for HPC. But I wanted to share this with you now, and then by next month, we should have kind of a final document ready.
Yeah, this is really helpful.
Great.
Well, and I think the important thing is, like you said, it appears and seems that if you're seconding a motion, you're in concurrence with it, when really it just means you concur being able to vote
You're
on
moving
that
it forward
in
for a
any
vote.
direction.
Generally, you'll find that, people, you kind of don't want to second a motion that you don't support, but it's not legally, Robert's rules, necessary. So we can speed things along that way.
Well, and I think what took place last month, which kind of concerned me, is when the motion was made and there wasn't a second initially, and then it appeared as if some commissioners had further comments and questions, and I felt like the motion wasn't ready to go forward. But then I, didn't know how we could retract it.
Right. And that's one thing that we're hoping to learn from what we get from the city attorney, because going through, we found things that New York City does. We found a bunch of documents from around the country, but we weren't comfortable saying, okay, that's what we're going to do. But there's it's a motion for revision, where you can actually revise a motion, or you can reopen a hearing. But those were like really detailed aspects, so we want to make sure that that's the way city attorney wants us to run it. So we'll definitely get an answer for that. My guess is you can't reopen. You have to let that motion die, reopen the hearing, answer questions. But ideally, it's really good to just make sure that doesn't happen. But if it does, it does. So.
If I may, if you watch this regular watcher of city council, as many staff are, because we have to go to council often, sometimes you'll watch the council members make a motion and somebody will second the motion with amendments, which then sort of turns back to the original maker, the maker of the first motion. Do you support your motion with the following amendments? They'll say yes, and then I'll move forward to a vote. So that could also be a case I could see happening in HPC, where the motion is to approve, say, a Mills Act, but then the person who wants to second is like, well, I'd like to add some conditions, so I'm going to second that motion with the amendment that I'd like to add the following conditions. So that's another way that the motion continued.
Yeah, and then that's one of the things we got in the way New York handles this, and we'll get the actual language for it once the city attorney says it's cool.
The other thing that I think kind of goes along with this protocol is also just consistency in our review of properties and past decisions, making sure that they're in line with the future, ways we're going to evaluate properties, especially for historic designation, criteria. If we enforce one issue on a home or a property to remove an obstructing, alteration, then on another home we don't at all. Like, just us all trying to be a little more consistent, not just in protocol in motions, but in also our review and our guidelines and considerations for voting.
Well, I thank you for bringing that up, because I actually just made some notes, and I wanted to, I wanted to just throw out to my fellow commissioners and see how, Jay, what your thoughts are on that. Maybe when we do have an individual designation with a Mills Act contract come before us, that we could get perhaps a listing similar to the spreadsheet you put together, which shows us which work has already been completed, of what conditions we've placed on homes that we've approved before, just to give us an idea, I think, to speak to your thoughts about consistency, so that we can just sort of have something to look back on and give us a recollection of what conditions we've placed on properties.
Yeah, we can certainly keep a running list of conditions. What we've learned over the years is different commissions, when the membership changes, kind of have different attitudes, and consistency is a great goal. It will never be fully achieved, but I think it's important. It's very important for the commission to keep in mind, previous decision making and try to be as consistent as possible. So I think to that end, there's no reason this all easily compiled information, and we could certainly have that for you.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, again, recognizing that every property is unique and has its own individual circumstances, but just to
Yeah, I think
sort of keep us, help my memory at least, on an ongoing basis of the decisions we've made.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you for preparing this draft. Will we see this next month or a month after?
Hopefully next month. It just didn't. The timing didn't work out with
Great.
city attorney. So
Do you have anything else to add?
I have nothing else.
And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for attending tonight.
And then there were two.